I, 32, F, have a husband, Mark, 35, M, who always considered my business a joke. It was a small online shop where I sold handcrafted leather goods. I poured my heart into it during evenings and weekends. It wasn't making a fortune, but it was mine, and it was growing. My day job, a stable but quiet position in a government office, paid the majority of our bills. It was a job I rarely discussed, mostly because it was laden with bureaucratic jargon and confidentiality agreements. To Mark, I was just a paper pusher. My real passion, my leatherwork, was what he chose to focus on, but only to mock it. He called it my little hobby and my arts and crafts project. He would say it in front of friends, his tone dripping with a kind of affectionate condescension that made my stomach clench. He thought it was charming, a funny little quirk about his wife. I found it deeply humiliating. The pressure wasn't just from him. His mother, Carol, was his biggest cheerleader in this particular brand of cruelty. She saw my business as a silly distraction from my real duties, which she believed were to support Mark's career and eventually raise a family. She would often ask, with a tight little smile, if my playtime was over yet. She wondered aloud when I would get serious about my life. The fact that my boring government job provided the financial stability that allowed Mark to take risks in his own freelance consulting career was an irony completely lost on them both. They lived in a world where his potential was infinite and my contributions were trivial. For a long time, I tried to keep the peace. I would smile through the jabs, change the subject, or pretend I didn't hear them. I told myself that his words didn't matter as long as our life together was solid. I loved him, or at least I loved the man I thought he was underneath all the casual dismissiveness. The breaking point, the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation of our marriage, came during his mother's birthday dinner. We were at a fancy restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and tiny forks. Carol was opening her gifts. My sister-in-law gave her a spa package. My father-in-law gave her a pearl necklace. Mark then presented his gift with a flourish. It was a stunning, first-edition copy of her favorite classic novel, bound in ornate leather. It was an incredibly thoughtful and expensive gift. Carol was overjoyed, holding it to her chest as if it were a sacred artifact. "Oh, Mark, it's exquisite," she breathed, her eyes shining. "You always know just what I love." He puffed out his chest, soaking in the praise. "Only the best for you, Mom." Then he turned to me, a smirk playing on his lips. He gestured toward the book in his mother's hands. "Lena even helped in her own way," he announced to the table. "All those hours she spends tooling around with her little leather scraps finally paid off. Gave me the idea." The table chuckled politely. My face burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He had not just dismissed my work, he had twisted it, reframing my passion as nothing more than a whimsical source of inspiration for his own grand gesture. He made it sound like I was a child playing with mud pies who had accidentally given a master chef an idea for a gourmet meal. I felt small, insignificant, and utterly furious. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him how much that hurt. But I looked at Carol's beaming face and the expectant eyes of his family, and I did what I always did. I swallowed my anger and forced a smile. That single moment, however, planted a seed of doubt in my mind. It was a cold, hard little seed that began to grow in the quiet moments when I was alone. I started to wonder what else he was dismissing. I started to wonder what else he was hiding behind that charming, condescending smile. I tried to bring it up with him later that night, when we were home. I waited until we were getting ready for bed, hoping for a moment of quiet intimacy where my words might actually land. "What you said tonight at the restaurant really bothered me," I began, my voice softer than I intended. He was unbuttoning his shirt, not looking at me. "What did I say?" he asked, his tone casual, almost bored. "About my leatherwork," I clarified. "You called it scraps and made it sound like a joke." It felt really dismissive, Mark. He finally turned to look at me, an expression of pure bafflement on his face. "Oh, come on, Lena. I was just teasing. It was a compliment. I was saying your hobby inspired me to get Mom that amazing gift. You should be happy about that." It didn't feel like a compliment. I said, my voice gaining a little strength. It felt like you were mocking me in front of your entire family. He sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of exasperation. You're being way too sensitive. It's not a big deal. It's just your little side project. It's not like it's a real business or anything. That was it. That was the line. The quiet fury from dinner came roaring back. It is a real business, I said, my voice low and tight. It makes money. It has customers. And it's important to me, even if it's not important to you. He laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was sharp and dismissive. Okay, sure. It's a real business that barely covers the cost of its own materials. Meanwhile, my work is what keeps this roof over our heads. He gestured around our bedroom, at the life my boring government salary had largely paid for. The injustice of that statement was staggering. I felt the fight drain out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy sense of defeat. He didn't just disrespect my passion. He was completely blind to my actual, tangible contributions to our life. He saw my steady, reliable income as a given, a background noise, while his own fluctuating, often precarious freelance work was the main event. That's not fair, Mark, I whispered, but he had already turned his back on me. I'm tired, he said, pulling back the covers. Let's just drop it. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I stood there for a long time, watching him settle into bed. He was asleep within minutes, but I was wide awake. The seed of doubt had sprouted. It was no longer just a feeling of being disrespected. It was a chilling realization that the man I had married did not see me at all. He saw a caricature, a supporting character in the grand story of his own life. And I knew, with a certainty that frightened me, that I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. I just had no idea what it would be, or how devastating that change would ultimately become for him. The feeling of being unseen was a slow poison, and I had been drinking it for years, telling myself it was just water. But that night, I finally tasted the bitterness. I finally understood that I was being poisoned, and my husband was the one holding the cup. The days that followed were tense. I created a distance between us, a small, protective buffer of silence. I focused on my work, both at my government job and in my small workshop at home. The smell of leather and wax was a comfort, a reminder of something that was wholly mine, something he couldn't touch or tarnish with his casual disdain. I found myself working later and later, not just because I was busy, but because I dreaded the evenings. I dreaded the forced conversations, the way he would talk about his day, his clients, his successes, without ever once asking about mine. It was as if my life only existed in the spaces where it intersected with his. My friend, Sarah, noticed the change in me immediately. We met for coffee one Saturday, and she took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "You look exhausted," she said, her voice full of concern. I tried to brush it off. "Just busy with work." She raised an eyebrow. "Is it just work? Or is it Mark?" Sarah was the only person I was ever truly honest with about my marriage. She had never been a fan of Mark's. She saw his condescension for what it was, not as a charming quirk, but as a deep-seated insecurity. I finally broke down and told her about the birthday dinner, about the conversation we had afterward, about the cold, empty space that had opened up between us. She listened patiently, her expression growing harder with every word I spoke. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Lena, this is not just about your business," she said softly. "This is about respect. He doesn't respect you. He doesn't see your work, your passion, or your contribution to your life together as valuable. He minimizes you to make himself feel bigger." Her words were like a punch to the gut, mostly because I knew they were true. "So, what do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I still love him." "Do you?" she countered gently. "Or do you love the idea of the man you thought he was? Because the man you're describing sounds like a selfish child who needs to be the center of attention at all times." I had no answer for that. The question hung in the air between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I wanted to defend him, to list all his good qualities, but my mind came up blank. All I could think about was the sting of his words, the casual cruelty in his laughter. Just be careful, Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Keep your eyes open. People like Mark, they're usually hiding more than just a fragile ego. Her words were prophetic. I didn't know it then, but I was about to discover just how much he was hiding. The first hint came a few weeks later. I was paying our bills online, a task I always handled. I logged into our joint savings account, intending to transfer some money to our checking account. And that's when I saw it. The balance was significantly lower than it should have been. My heart started to pound in my chest. I scrolled through the transaction history, my eyes scanning for an explanation. There were no large transfers, no big purchases that I had forgotten about. There was just a single, massive withdrawal. A wire transfer for $10,000. It had been made 3 weeks prior. The recipient was listed only as an overseas bank, with a string of numbers I didn't recognize. My mind raced. $10,000. It was a huge amount of money for us. It was a significant chunk of the emergency fund I had so carefully built up over the years with bonuses from my boring job. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I immediately called Mark. "Hey, what's up?" he answered, his voice cheerful and unconcerned. I try to keep my own voice steady. "Mark, I'm looking at our savings account. There's a $10,000 wire transfer from 3 weeks ago. Do you know anything about that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was just a second, but it felt like an eternity. "Oh, that," he said, his voice suddenly a little strained. "Yeah, I meant to tell you about that. It was an investment opportunity. A friend of a friend. High risk, high reward kind of thing. I wanted to surprise you when it paid off. An investment?" It sounded plausible, if a little reckless. But something about his tone felt off. It was too quick, too rehearsed. An investment in what? I asked, pushing for details. "And why didn't you talk to me about it first?" "That's a lot of money, Mark." "Look, Lena, you don't understand this stuff," he said, his voice shifting from strained to irritated. "It's complicated financial maneuvering. I'm handling it. Just trust me, okay? It's going to be huge for us." "I don't understand this stuff," I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "I'm the one who manages our finances. I'm the one who built that savings account. I think I have a right to understand where $10,000 of our money went." "You're overreacting," he snapped. "I told you it's an investment. I'll get it back, plus more. Now I have to go. I'm in the middle of something." And with that, he hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone, my hand trembling. He hadn't just been dismissive, he had been actively deceptive. He had taken a huge sum of our money without my knowledge, and his explanation was flimsy at best. Sarah's words echoed in my ears. People like Mark, they're usually hiding more than just a fragile ego. The cold seed of doubt had now grown into a thorny vine, wrapping itself around my heart. He was lying to me. I didn't know what the truth was, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it wasn't a high-risk, high-reward investment. And I was going to find out what it was. The feeling of being unseen had transformed into a new, more dangerous feeling. The feeling of being played for a fool. And I was not a fool. My quiet government job had taught me one thing above all else: how to be meticulous, how to follow a paper trail. And I was about to apply those skills to my own life. The investigation had begun. My first step was to look for any piece of paper, any email, any clue that might shed light on the mysterious wire transfer. I started with his desk, a place I normally avoided. It was a chaotic mess of papers, invoices, and half-empty coffee mugs. I felt a pang of guilt as I started to sift through the piles, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of grim determination. I was no longer a wife looking for an explanation. I was an investigator searching for the truth. I found nothing related to an investment. There were no prospectuses, no emails from a broker, no contracts. What I did find, tucked away in the back of a drawer, was a folder I didn't recognize. It was a plain manila folder with no label. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. Inside were several documents. The first was a printout of a flight confirmation. It was a round-trip ticket to Argentina, booked in Mark's name. The flight had departed 2 days before the wire transfer was made and returned a week later. I stared at the dates, a cold dread creeping up my spine. He had told me he was at a consulting conference in Chicago that week. He had called me every night, telling me about the boring keynote speakers and the terrible hotel food. It had all been a lie. The next document was a receipt from a high-end jewelry store in Buenos Aires. The date on the receipt was from the middle of his supposed conference. The item purchased was a diamond tennis bracelet. The price made me gasp. It was just over $5,000. Half of the money he had taken from our savings. This was not an investment. This was something else entirely. This was a secret trip, a secret life. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I sat down heavily in his desk chair, the papers trembling in my hand. Who was he buying diamond bracelets for in Argentina? The question was a terrifying one, but I already knew, deep down, that the answer would shatter my world. I needed more information. I logged into our shared phone account online. With a few clicks, I was able to access the detailed call and text logs for his number. I scrolled back to the week of his conference. There were dozens of calls and texts to a single number, an international number with an Argentinian country code. The calls were long, some lasting over an hour. The texts were frequent, a constant stream of communication. My hands felt like ice. I knew I was crossing a line, invading his privacy in a way I never had before. But he had crossed a line first. He had lied to me, stolen from our future, and was clearly living a double life. I had to know the truth. I needed to see the content of those messages. The phone account didn't show the text messages themselves, just the record of them. I needed to get into his phone. That evening, when he came home, I acted as normally as I could. It was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. I smiled, asked about his day, and made dinner. Every word felt like a lie. Every touch felt like a betrayal. He was a stranger to me now, a man with a secret life that I was slowly, painfully uncovering. He seemed oblivious to the storm raging inside me. He complained about a client, praised my cooking, and talked about his plans for the weekend. All the while, I was watching him, studying him, looking for any crack in his facade. But there was nothing. He was a masterful liar. I waited until he was in the shower. His phone was on the nightstand, charging. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I picked it up, my fingers fumbling with the screen. It was locked with a passcode. Of course it was. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried our anniversary. The phone lit up. It was unlocked. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it almost made me laugh. He was so confident in his deception, so sure of my ignorance, that he used our anniversary as the password to the phone he used to communicate with his other life. I quickly found the messaging app. There was the Argentinian number at the top of the list. The contact name was Isabella. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the thread. And there it was. My entire world, crumbling into pieces on a tiny glowing screen. There were hundreds of messages. Messages filled with words of love and affection. Mi amor, he called her. Mi vida, my love. My life. There were pictures. Pictures of them together in Buenos Aires. They were smiling, laughing, holding each other. She was beautiful, with long dark hair and a radiant smile. In one picture, she was wearing the diamond tennis bracelet. There were messages discussing their future. He promised her he would leave me. He told her he was just waiting for the right time. He said he was trapped in a loveless marriage with a cold, boring woman who didn't understand him. He wrote about my silly little hobby, describing it as pathetic and childish. He was using the same words he used to my face, but this time they were not delivered with a condescending smile. They were delivered with pure, unadulterated contempt. He was not just cheating on me. He was actively destroying my character to this other woman, painting me as a villain in a story where he was the victim. And then I saw the messages about the money. She was asking for it. She spoke of her family's financial troubles, of her dream to open a small boutique. He promised her everything. He told her he was setting up an investment to get her the startup capital she needed. The $10,000. It wasn't for a high-risk stock. It was for her. He had stolen our emergency fund, the money I had painstakingly saved, to give to his mistress. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The shock and the pain were still there, but they were underneath a layer of ice. The hurt had crystallized into something hard and sharp. This was no longer about a loveless marriage or a lack of respect. This was a calculated, cruel deception. He had systematically lied, stolen, and betrayed me at every turn. He had built a fantasy life on a foundation of my hard work and my trust. I took screenshots of everything. The messages, the pictures, the call logs. I emailed them to a new, secret email address that I had created that afternoon. I then deleted the email from the sent folder on his phone. I put the phone back on the nightstand, exactly where I had found it. When he came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, humming a cheerful tune, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, perfectly still. He smiled at me. "Everything okay?" he asked. I looked at him, at this man who was a complete stranger to me, and I gave him a small, tight smile. "Everything is fine," I said. It was the last time I would ever lie to him. From that moment on, I would only deal in the truth. The cold, hard, and utterly devastating truth. The game had changed. He thought he was in control, that he was the one pulling the strings. He had no idea that I had just found the scissors, and I was going to cut every single one. My mind worked with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of trying to please him, of trying to understand his moods and anticipate his needs, had vanished. In its place was a singular, sharp focus. I was not going to cry. I was not going to scream. I was going to be methodical. I was going to be strategic. My boring government job had trained me for this. It was all about procedure, evidence, and execution. The next morning, I called my friend Sarah. I met her at a small park near her office, a place where we wouldn't be overheard. I told her everything. I showed her the screenshots on my phone. Her face went through a series of emotions, shock, then fury, then a quiet, simmering rage on my behalf. "That absolute monster," she breathed, her voice shaking with anger. "Lena, you have to leave him. You have to destroy him." "I am going to leave him," I said, my voice calm and even. "But I'm not going to do it in a messy, emotional way. I'm going to do it on my terms. I need a plan." We spent the next hour mapping it out. The first step was to secure my finances. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I went to my bank. I opened a new checking and savings account in my name only. I explained the situation in vague terms to the bank manager, a kind woman who looked at me with sympathetic eyes. I arranged to have my government paycheck deposited directly into my new account, starting with the very next pay cycle. I then went online and transferred half of the money from our joint checking account into my new account. I left the depleted savings account as it was. That was evidence. The second step was to find a lawyer. Sarah recommended a woman named Ms. Davis, known for being tough, thorough, and discreet. I made an appointment for the following week. I needed to understand my legal options to know what I was entitled to in a divorce. I needed to be prepared. Living in the same house with Mark during this period was a surreal experience. It was like being an actor in a play. I went through the motions of our life together. I cooked meals, we watched television, we talked about trivial things. But I was no longer present. I was an observer, gathering data. I noted every lie he told, every vague answer he gave. He told me his investment was looking promising. He said his conference in Chicago had been a huge success, leading to new client leads. I would just nod and smile, a knot of ice tightening in my stomach. His ability to lie so effortlessly was truly astounding. He was not just a cheater, he was a sociopath. His mother, Carol, called a few times that week. She was still gushing about her birthday gift. "Mark is just the most thoughtful son," she said to me over the phone. "He takes such good care of us." "You are a very lucky woman, Lena." "Yes, I am," I replied, my voice a perfect imitation of a happy, contented wife. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I saw now how they worked together, a toxic ecosystem of mutual admiration built on a foundation of my erasure. He needed her praise to feel important, and she needed his grand gestures to feel valued. I was just a means to an end for both of them. The most difficult part was pretending to be physically affectionate with him. He would try to kiss me, to hold my hand. Each touch felt like a violation. I would make excuses. I was tired, I had a headache, I was stressed about a project at work. He seemed to accept these excuses at face value, too wrapped up in his own world to notice the chasm that had opened between us. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. As long as I was playing my part, performing the role of the dutiful wife, the details didn't matter to him. During my meeting with Ms. Davis, I laid out the entire story. I showed her the bank statements, the flight confirmations, the jewelry receipt, and the screenshots of the text messages. She listened intently, her expression grim. When I was finished, she looked at me with a mixture of professional assessment and genuine empathy. "This is not just infidelity," she said, her voice firm. "This is financial dissipation. He has been using marital assets to fund an extramarital affair. This is a significant factor in divorce proceedings. You have an exceptionally strong case, Ms. Evans." She then walked me through the process. We would file for divorce on the grounds of both adultery and financial misconduct. We would subpoena his financial records to uncover the full extent of his spending. We would fight for an unequal division of assets in my favor, given that he had deliberately squandered a significant portion of our savings. "He will likely try to fight this," Ms. Davis warned. "He will lie. He will try to paint you as vindictive or unstable. You need to be prepared for that." "I'm prepared," I said, and I meant it. The fear and hurt were still there, but they were now fuel for my resolve. I just want what I am owed, and I want him out of my life. As I left her office, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in a very long time. I had a team. I had a plan. I was no longer a victim in his story. I was the author of my own. The quiet paper pusher was about to show her teeth. The most chilling discovery was yet to come. It was something that elevated Mark's betrayal from a simple case of cheating and theft to something far more sinister. I found it by accident. I was looking for a document related to our mortgage, and I went into his email account, which was saved on our home computer. I had his password from a time he had asked me to look up something for him months ago. As I was searching for the mortgage papers, another email caught my eye. The subject line was Visa Application Support Documents. My blood ran cold. I clicked on it. It was an email from Mark to Isabella. The body of the email was a list of instructions. He was telling her exactly what she needed to do to apply for a long-term visitor visa to our country. He had attached several documents for her to use as part of her application. One was a letter of invitation from him. In it, he described her as a close family friend who would be staying with him to experience the culture. He stated that he would be her full financial sponsor during her stay. Another attachment was a copy of his bank statement. But it wasn't the statement from our joint account. It was a statement from a personal account I never knew he had. He had clearly been siphoning money into it for some time. But the most damning part was the plan he laid out in the email. He told her that once she arrived on the visitor visa, they would get married. He explained that marrying a citizen would be the fastest way for her to get permanent residency. He wrote, "I just need to handle things with Lena first. I'm working on a plan to make it look like she's the one who wants to end things. It will be messy, but we need to be smart about it. Once she's out of the picture, we can start our life together." I had to read the sentence several times before it fully registered. Make it look like she's the one who wants to end things. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to orchestrate a scenario where he would emerge as the victim. He was going to manipulate our separation, paint me as the villain, and walk away with his reputation intact, ready to start a new life with the woman he had been funding with our money. The mockery of my business, the condescension, the gaslighting. It wasn't just casual cruelty. It was a strategy. It was all part of his long-term plan to undermine my confidence, to make me feel small and unstable so that when he finally made his move, people would believe his version of events. They would see me as the emotional, irrational one, and him as the long-suffering husband who had finally had enough. I felt a profound, chilling sense of violation. This man had not only betrayed our vows, he had been actively plotting my social and emotional destruction. He was going to turn our friends, our family, against me. He was going to rewrite our entire history to suit his narrative. The sheer, calculated malice of it took my breath away. I saved a copy of the email, adding it to my growing file of evidence. This changed everything. My plan to file for divorce and fight for my share of the assets suddenly felt insufficient. It was too clean, too clinical. He deserved more than just a legal defeat. He deserved to be exposed. He deserved for his carefully constructed world to come crashing down around him. He wanted to make me the villain? Fine. It was time for me to stop playing the part of the victim. A new idea began to form in my mind, a wild and audacious thought that made my heart beat a little faster. The visa application. He was helping her apply for a visa. My job. My boring, bureaucratic, paper-pushing job. I was a consular officer. My official title was adjudication officer. I spent my days reviewing and making decisions on visa applications. The chances were astronomical, of course. My department was huge. Cases were assigned randomly by a computer system to ensure impartiality. The odds of her specific application landing on my desk were probably less than 1 in 1,000. It was a lottery ticket, a fantasy. But what if? What if the universe, after all this pain and betrayal, decided to hand me a gift? What if her file, with her name and her photo and all of his lies, ended up in my hands? I would have the power to decide. I would be the one to determine whether his fantasy life would be allowed to cross our borders. The thought was intoxicating. It was a level of poetic justice I could barely comprehend. He had mocked my work, dismissed it as unimportant, never once bothering to understand what I actually did. He had no idea that my boring job held the keys to the kingdom he was trying to build. I did not act on it immediately. I simply held the possibility in my mind, a tiny, glowing ember of hope. I continued with my plan. I met with Ms. Davis again and showed her the new email. Her eyes widened as she read it. "This is a game changer, Lena," she said. "This proves premeditation and malice. This will be very, very useful." I continued to live with Mark, the ghost in my own home. I watched him, this man who was plotting my downfall, and I felt nothing but a cold, hard resolve. He would occasionally make comments about the future, about a trip he wanted us to take next year, about renovations for the house. Every word was a lie, a piece of the elaborate fiction he was weaving. And I would nod and smile and play my part, all the while knowing that his future was not going to be anything like he imagined. He thought he was writing the story. He had no idea that I was about to write the final chapter. And the ending would be one he never saw coming. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day, I went to work and did my job. I reviewed applications from students, tourists, and temporary workers. Each file represented a life, a dream, a hope. I took my responsibilities seriously. I followed the law to the letter. I was fair, impartial, and thorough. My colleagues respected me for my meticulousness. They called me by-the-book Lena. They had no idea about the storm raging beneath my calm, professional exterior. Every morning, when the new batch of case files was assigned to my queue, my heart would leap into my throat. I would scroll through the list of names, my breath held tight in my chest. And every day, her name was not there. Weeks turned into a month. I started to think it was just a foolish fantasy, a desperate hope that was never going to materialize. Mark was getting more and more confident. He spoke of his investment as if it were a sure thing. He told me he was expecting a big payout soon. I knew he was talking about her arrival. He was getting everything in order for his new life. One evening, he came home in a particularly good mood. He had a bottle of expensive champagne. "Let's celebrate," he announced, popping the cork with a flourish. "What are we celebrating?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "The future," he said, handing me a glass. "Big things are happening. A new project I've been working on is finally coming together. It's going to change everything for us." I knew he was talking about her. The project was Isabella. The payout was her presence in our country, in our life. I felt a surge of nausea, but I forced myself to smile and raise my glass. To the future, I said, my voice hollow. The next day at work was like any other. I cleared my morning appointments, adjudicated a dozen routine cases, and then took my lunch break. When I returned to my desk, the afternoon case list had been uploaded. I clicked it open, my eyes scanning the familiar list of names and application numbers. And then I saw it. Isabella Garcia. Country of origin, Argentina. Visa class, B2 visitor for pleasure. I stared at the screen, my mind completely blank for a full 10 seconds. It was real. It had actually happened. The 1 in 1,000 chance had landed. The universe had not just handed me a gift, it had delivered a thunderbolt. Her entire life, her future, his entire plan, was now sitting in my digital queue, waiting for my judgment. I took a deep, shuddering breath and clicked to open the file. And there she was. Her photograph, smiling out from the application form. It was the same woman from the pictures on Mark's phone. All the information was there. Her address, her date of birth, her passport number, and the supporting documents. There was the letter of invitation from Mark, declaring her as a close family friend. There was his fraudulent bank statement from his secret account. There was her statement, claiming the purpose of her visit was tourism and to experience the culture. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed house of cards. And I was the one with the power to blow it all down. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously reviewing the file. I did it by the book, just as I would with any other case. I was not going to deny this application out of spite or revenge. I was going to deny it because it was, by every legal and procedural standard, a deniable case. The law had to be on my side. First, the issue of financial sponsorship. Mark had submitted a bank statement from an account that was not their primary marital asset. More importantly, he had declared on the form that he was single. A blatant lie. An immigration officer is trained to look for inconsistencies, and this was a massive red flag. A quick cross-reference in the system would show his legal marital status. This misrepresentation alone was grounds for denial. Second, the issue of immigrant intent. A visitor visa is for temporary non-immigrant travel. The applicant must prove they have strong ties to their home country and no intention of remaining in the destination country permanently. Isabella had declared she was unemployed. She had minimal funds in her own bank account. She had no property, no dependents, no compelling reason to return to Argentina. Her only significant tie seemed to be to her sponsor, Mark. To an experienced officer, this screamed of a high risk for overstaying her visa. This was textbook immigrant intent, cleverly disguised as a tourist trip. Finally, the letter of invitation itself was weak. It was vague and lacked specific details about the nature of their friendship or the planned itinerary. It read like a template, which it probably was. I began to type my notes into the official adjudication system. I documented every inconsistency, every red flag. I cited the specific sections of the Immigration and Nationality Act that applied. I built a careful, logical, and legally airtight case for refusal. No one who reviewed my work would ever question the decision. It was a clear-cut denial, based entirely on the evidence presented in the application itself. My personal feelings were irrelevant. The law was on my side. As I typed the final sentence of my assessment, I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if I was watching myself from a distance. I was a professional doing my job. But with every keystroke, I was dismantling my husband's secret world. I was taking his grand plan, the one he had so arrogantly crafted, and turning it to dust. I clicked the submit button. The system processed the decision. A notification would be sent to the embassy in Buenos Aires. Isabella Garcia would receive an email in the next 24 hours, informing her that her visa application had been refused. There would be no explanation, just a standard form letter citing a section of the law. There was no appeal process for this type of refusal. She would have to wait a significant amount of time before she could even think about reapplying, and her chances would be even slimmer the second time around. It was done. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of my office suddenly deafening. I had done it. I had used the very job he mocked, the very position he saw as meaningless, to protect myself and to deliver a consequence so perfect, so poetic, that it was almost unbelievable. He thought my power was in the money I earned. He had no idea that my real power was in the stamp I wielded. I went home that evening feeling a profound sense of calm. The storm inside me had passed. The anger and the hurt were still there, but they were now quiet, embers rather than a raging fire. I was no longer waiting for something to happen. I had made it happen. Now, all that was left was to watch the fallout. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was going to be spectacular. Mark was about to learn a very hard lesson about underestimating the woman he had married. He was about to discover what a boring paper pusher was truly capable of. The next 2 days were a masterclass in patience. I went about my life, a placid surface on a churning sea of anticipation. Mark was blissfully unaware. He was cheerful, almost giddy. He was clearly expecting good news from Argentina. He talked about making plans for the next few months, a special project that would require a lot of his time and attention. I knew he was preparing for her arrival. He was making space in his life, in our home, for another woman. The audacity of it was still shocking. The call came on a Thursday evening. We were in the living room, supposedly watching a movie. My phone was on the table beside me, silent. His was in his hand, as it always was. Suddenly it rang. I saw the international country code on the screen before he quickly angled it away from me. It was her. He stood up abruptly. "I have to take this," he said, his voice tight. "It's a client." He walked out onto the back porch, closing the sliding glass door behind him. I didn't need to hear the conversation. I could see it all on his face. I watched him through the glass. His initial posture was relaxed, a smile on his face. Then, as he listened, his expression began to change. The smile vanished. His shoulders slumped. He started pacing, his free hand running through his hair in agitation. He was talking rapidly, his voice rising in frustration. He was gesturing wildly, a man whose perfect plan had just been torpedoed. I sat there on the couch, my gaze fixed on the television screen, but I wasn't seeing the movie. I was watching the complete and utter collapse of my husband's world, reflected in the dark glass of the door. It was a silent film of his own making, and I was the sole audience member. The performance was mesmerizing. After about 10 minutes, he came back inside. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He looked like a man who had just been robbed. He didn't look at me. He just walked over to the bar cart and poured himself a large glass of whiskey, which he downed in 2 gulps. "Bad news?" I asked, my voice infused with just the right amount of mild, wifely concern. He slammed the glass down on the counter. "You have no idea," he seethed. "Just incompetence. Absolute, bureaucratic incompetence." He began to pace the living room like a caged animal. "Idiots. Mindless government drones with a rubber stamp, holding people's lives in their hands, and they don't even care. They just ruin things for no reason." Oh, the irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. He was ranting about government drones, about paper pushers, about the very people he had always dismissed as unimportant. He was railing against a system that he had never bothered to understand, a system that I was a part of. "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. "Did your client have a problem?" "It's not a client," he snapped, his control finally breaking. "It's a friend. A friend of mine was supposed to come visit. She's a wonderful person, a brilliant artist, and she wanted to come here, to see the country. And some idiot, some faceless moron in an office somewhere, denied her visa. Just like that. No reason, no explanation. Just denied." He was practically spitting the words. His rage was so pure, so potent. It was everything I had felt for the past few months, mirrored back at me. "Oh, that's terrible," I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. Why would they do that? Who knows? He shouted, throwing his hands up in the air. They don't have to have a reason. They're unaccountable. They can just ruin a person's life on a whim because they're on a power trip. It's disgusting. I let him rant for another few minutes. I let him rail against the injustice of it all. I let him dig his own grave, shovelful by shovelful. He was so consumed by his own frustration, so blinded by his arrogance, that he couldn't see the truth sitting right in front of him. Finally, when he seemed to have run out of steam, he slumped onto the armchair opposite me, his head in his hands. He looked defeated. He looked small. This was the moment. The time for games was over. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I set the glass down on the coaster with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. I know about Isabella, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor blade. He froze. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and fear. It was the first time he had looked truly scared. What? He stammered, his face draining of all color. What are you talking about? Who's Isabella? He was still trying to lie. Even now, cornered and exposed, his first instinct was to deceive. I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. Isabella Garcia, I continued, my voice as cold and steady as a frozen river. The brilliant artist from Argentina. The friend who was denied a visa today. The woman you bought a $5,000 diamond bracelet for in Buenos Aires with money you stole from our savings account. I watched as the blood drained completely from his face. He looked like he had been physically struck. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was caught. Utterly and completely caught. I know about the secret trip, I went on, my voice relentless. I know about the phone calls, the text messages. Mi amor, mi vida, I know about your plan to marry her, to make it look like our divorce was my fault. I know everything, Mark. He just stared at me, his mouth hanging open. The confident, arrogant man I had known for years had vanished, replaced by a hollow-eyed shell of a person. He looked pathetic. He finally found his voice, a weak, desperate croak. Lena, I can explain. There is nothing to explain, I said, standing up. There is only the truth. And the truth is that you are a liar, a thief, and a cheat. You built a fantasy world for yourself, and you thought you were smart enough to get away with it. He started to babble, the words tumbling out of him in a desperate, incoherent stream. He was sorry. It was a mistake. He loved me. He never meant to hurt me. It was all lies, the pathetic, reflexive writhing of a creature caught in a trap. I let him talk until he had exhausted himself. Then, in the silence that followed, I delivered the final blow. You want to know who the faceless moron is? I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. The government drone who denied her visa? The incompetent paper pusher who ruined your grand plan? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified comprehension. He was finally starting to understand. He was finally seeing me, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as the architect of his demise. I lean forward, and my voice is steady, calm, and absolutely lethal in the quiet room. It was me, Mark, I say, and for the first time, I let him see the cold fury in my eyes. Her application landed on my desk. I was the adjudicating officer. I denied her visa. I did it by the book, of course. She has immigrant intent. You lied about your marital status on the sponsorship form. It was an easy refusal. His face is a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw is slack. His eyes are wide, unblinking. He looks at me as if he's never seen me before. And in a way, he hasn't. He has never seen this version of me. The version that doesn't just absorb his cruelty, but reflects it back at him, magnified 1,000 times. You, he whispers, the word barely audible. You did this. I did, I confirm, my voice betraying no emotion. You spent years mocking my job. You called me a paper pusher. You never once thought to ask what I actually do. You were so wrapped up in your own ego, your own grand plans, that you never saw me as anything more than a supporting character. You underestimated me. And that was your biggest mistake. He continues to stare, his mind clearly struggling to process the sheer, poetic totality of his defeat. The weapon he never knew I had, the one he had actively belittled, was the very one I had used to dismantle his entire future. He finally breaks. A strangled sob escapes his lips. He buries his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. How could you, he chokes out. How could you be so cruel? The question is so absurd, so utterly devoid of self-awareness, that I actually laugh. It's not a happy sound. It's cold and sharp. Cruel. I repeat, the word dripping with disbelief. You want to talk about cruel? You stole from me. You lied to me every single day. You were plotting to destroy my reputation and abandon me. You systematically belittled my passion and my work to make yourself feel powerful. And you have the audacity to ask me how I could be cruel? I stand up and walk towards the door. I feel a strange lightness, as if a physical weight has been lifted from my shoulders. You should call a lawyer, Mark, I say, not even looking back at him. Miss Davis is my attorney. She will be in touch with yours. I'll be staying with a friend until you've moved out of my house. He doesn't respond. He just sits there, a broken man in the ruins of the life he tried to build on lies. As I walk out the door, I don't feel triumph. I don't feel joy. I feel a profound and satisfying sense of peace. The war is over, and I have won. The following days were a whirlwind of logistics. I stayed with Sarah, who was an incredible pillar of support. She let me cry when I needed to, and she celebrated with me when I felt strong. She handled my phone, fielding the barrage of calls and texts that started coming from Mark, his mother, and his friends. I didn't want to talk to any of them. I had said everything I needed to say. Now it was up to the lawyers. Miss Davis was as good as her reputation. She filed the divorce papers immediately, along with a motion to freeze all our joint assets to prevent Mark from squandering any more of our money. The evidence I had gathered was so overwhelming that Mark's lawyer quickly advised him not to fight it. There was no defense for his actions. The emails, the bank statements, the text messages. They painted a clear and damning picture. One person who refused to accept reality was his mother, Carol. She called me, leaving a series of increasingly hysterical voicemails. At first, she was furious, accusing me of being a vindictive, horrible woman who was trying to ruin her perfect son's life. She claimed I was making it all up, that I was jealous and insecure. After a few days of my silence, Ms. Davis sent a cease and desist letter to Carol, along with a carefully selected sample of the evidence, the bank statement showing the wire transfer to Argentina, and the receipt for the diamond bracelet. The calls stopped abruptly after that. The hard proof of her son's theft and deceit was something even her maternal denial could not overcome. A week later, I had to go back to the house to pack the rest of my things. Mark had agreed to move out, and I wanted to be there to make sure he only took what was his. When I arrived, Carol was there helping him pack boxes. The moment she saw me, her face hardened into a mask of pure hatred. "You," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed him." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing but a cold pity. "Mark destroyed himself, Carol," I said, my voice even. "He made his choices. I am simply dealing with the consequences." Mark wouldn't even look at me. He just kept taping up boxes, his movements jerky and agitated. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His face was gaunt, his eyes were red-rimmed. The arrogant, confident man was gone, replaced by a ghost. "He loved you," Carol insisted, her voice cracking. "He made a mistake, but he loved you. You could have forgiven him." "A mistake is forgetting to take out the garbage," I replied, turning to face her fully. "A mistake is not systematically stealing thousands of dollars from your wife to fund a secret life with another woman while you simultaneously plot to ruin your wife's reputation. That is not a mistake. That is a character flaw. A deep and malicious one." She had no response to that. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The truth was too stark, too ugly for her to refute. I spent the next few hours packing my personal belongings, my leatherworking tools, and the inventory for my business. As I worked, I could hear them talking in hushed, angry tones in the other room. I heard her ask him what he was going to do now. I heard him say he didn't know. His consulting work had dried up, and his reputation was in tatters. The story of his affair and the financial deceit had started to leak out among our mutual friends. He was no longer the charming, successful man everyone admired.
He was a cautionary tale.
As I was carrying the last box out to my car, Mark finally spoke to me. He stood in the doorway, blocking my path. "Was it worth it, Lena?" he asked, his voice raw. Was ruining my life worth it? I stopped and looked him straight in the eye. "I didn't ruin your life, Mark."
I säger minne.
I walked past him without another word. As I drove away from the house we had shared, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. The divorce was finalized a few months later. As Ms. Davis had predicted, the judge awarded me an unequal distribution of our assets. I got the house, free and clear. I got a significant portion of his retirement account to compensate for the money he had stolen and spent on Isabella. By the time it was all over, he was left with very little. He had to move into a small, run-down apartment on the other side of town. My business, my little hobby, began to flourish. With the stress of my marriage gone, I had more time and energy to devote to it. I rented a small studio space and started participating in local artisan markets. My sales doubled, then tripled. It turned out that my silly little side project was a very real, very viable business. It was more than enough to support me. I still have my government job. I'm good at it. And every now and then, when I'm reviewing a file, I think about the power that comes with it. The power to change a life with a single decision. I never take it for granted. And I always do it by the book. I saw Mark once, about a year after the divorce. I was at a coffee shop with Sarah, laughing about something. I happened to glance out the window, and I saw him walking down the street. He looked older, tired. His clothes were rumpled. He was just another face in the crowd, a man stripped of all his former confidence. He didn't see me. I was just part of the scenery. It was a fitting reversal of roles. For years, he had been the main character, and I had been the background. Now, my life was vibrant and full, and he was the one who had become invisible. I don't hate him anymore. I don't feel much of anything when I think of him. He is just a chapter in my life that is now closed. He taught me a valuable lesson. He taught me that my passion is not a hobby. My work is not meaningless. And I am not a supporting character in anyone else's story. I am the author of my own. And the future is a blank page, waiting for me to write it. He wanted to write a tragic ending for me, but he ended up writing one for himself. And my story is just beginning.